The boys in blue have decided to become another shade darker. Yes, announcing on Twitter, I know you guys like that, announcing on Twitter that they've officially acquired Decimate from G2 and f3ro from 100 Thieves. Now, one thing that is important is that I believe that f3ro is technically on loan, to Envy in this situation. I believe he still has a contract under 100 Thieves. I've yet to officially get that under wraps, but I know that was one thing that was heavily talked about. And the rumors leading up to this Envy roster was that it would include a loan from 100T, which means that after the year is over, after however long the loan exists for, that 100T will get the rights back to f3ro. So that's kind of still up in the air and could actually be a very big contributing factor heading into franchising next season. And obviously by adding 2 players, Envy must as well depart with 2, which does include Envy trading away Apathy to Evil Geniuses and having to place Assault on the restricted free agent list. Now, I've got a chance to talk about this team a little bit in the past. I've had my opportunities to kind of talk about them from time to time, and one thing that I really do admire about Envy at this point was that they were one of the few teams that correctly identified what kind of squad they were. There are a lot of teams that are out there who think that they aspire to be something else than what they really are. They look at their players and they say, yes, we want to be a respawn-heavy team. We want to dominate you when it comes down to strictly slaying, brute force, all of those things. And then it starts to come forth, and they start struggling when it comes into respawns. Then they're starting to rely on their search and destroy. One thing that Envy has done right is that they realize they don't have the same slayers as a 100T on paper or as a Luminosity. But what Envy can do is win by focusing on certain aspects of their game and highlighting their specialties. And those specialties aren't just something that recently formed. It is the same blueprint that they've been following since they formed originally back last year, whenever they were under EG and won champs. The way that they vetoed their game plan, their strategy was far and above everybody else. And that's the reason why we saw a sleeper team, a team that was looked upon as a top 8, top 10 squad, come into the get this massive opportunity and start to perform against some of the best squads in the world. Is because of the strategy, not because solely of just their overall game plan in terms of slang wise. And I want to point out that they have continued what has been the original problem ever since the squad ever existed, which is inconsistency. So I give them a lot of props, right? I give them a lot of credit for being a team that is really dedicated in terms of how they kind of prepare for certain matches, their vetoes, etc. Fantastic, right? But in terms of what their problems rely on are also consistent, which happens to be inconsistency. So they're consistent in their inconsistencies. That's exactly how you want to kind of point it out. And like I said, this isn't something that recently just occurred. It has occurred ever since they first formed in World War II, the original Core 4, heading back to champs even in World War II, like I talked about. Second leading into champs at Seattle. Top 16 at Anaheim leading into champs. 10th at Stage 2 playoffs, and then went to win COD champs. They go from 4th to 16th to 10th to 1st. That kind of shows a little bit of a scatter plot there, something that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in terms of how a top 10 team happened to walk away with the title. And the reason why this team is changing is because they're tired of it. They're tired of the inconsistencies. Hook is tired of having to carry the roster in certain instances. Same thing with Silly, right? Whenever they're coming up against a number of different teams, and it's just not working out. But in my eyes, I think Envy made the right choices by the players that they picked up that will help strengthen what they're already good at and will provide and help in areas of which they were lacking previously. And they were absolutely lacking in terms of slaying. Outside of Hook and Silly, like we talked about, who else was there, right? Every other top team has multiple players that they can rely upon. If you're saying one player, our best players struggle, okay, well, here's player number 2 and player number 3, who oftentimes can be there to carry the load for a map, or maybe even a series from time to time. And that big 3 term that I've mentioned since the beginning of the year, it really is a thing. It actually is. The big 3 is really a thing that moves on in different tournaments, especially with how 5v5 works. You need to have 3 consistent players that you can rely on. And if Envy were struggling and Hook and Silly weren't playing their best, who are you looking out for? Well, normally I'm looking toward the SMG Slayer Apathy, the 2-time world champion. I'm looking at the CWL Champs MVP from last year in Assault. And the numbers speak for themselves whenever they were called on. Apathy, 0.84 overall. Assault, the main AR. And like I said, if he were probably playing as well as he was in terms of World War II, like leading into this title, like a lot of other players were, he'd probably be a Maddox right now. But in terms of how he has been playing, 0.97 overall. So I thought that, for me at least, Envy realized, let's bring in players who can help us with slang, and they bring in players that are going to help them improve as well in a lot of other areas. And I know I made an incorrect comment yesterday on the video that I was talking about, because at the time of the press release, Envy did announce and claim that f3ro would be the main AR, and what's kind of happening and the reason why that's no longer the case is essentially teams are starting to realize that the main AR role isn't too important in terms of kills. Like, if you have a very talented Slayer, you want him on the Maddox, and if he's a super fast player or maybe just doesn't work with the Maddox, you put him on a SOG. That's just kind of the way it is. So f3ro is coming into this roster as a Maddox, and while we can only take stats from Vegas, right, whenever he was actually on a starting lineup playing on LAN, he possessed a 1.04 KD, which you could argue not that much if you want to relate him to more of an assault type player. But he was fighting for position at that time, right? I mean, we know everything about the original Hunter T lineup. It was a matter of arguments. It was a matter of him having to fight for his role. We'll give Kenny what he wants, and it was kind of an issue that would constantly go back and forth. So, like I said, those stats could actually be a lot higher than what they're showing at that moment, because maybe at the time it was a matter of him switching on and off from different roles that he wasn't comfortable with in terms of f3ro. But my issue with f3ro, however, still relies on the attitude. It relies on how he's going to be able to work with other players, because when it came time for scrims with an old 100T roster, it wasn't an easy environment, right? It was a very toxic environment. It was a matter of not getting on to practice, not working together, having this group of a lot of really talented players together, and they didn't mesh, even despite having enabled do his very, very best thing possible to try to rally in the troops. And I'm not saying that f3ro was leading that, or he was the only problem in terms of why that roster wasn't working. But from what we've heard, he wasn't helping. He wasn't helping in that situation. So I think him coming to this team with Decimate, one of his old teammates, including Bells as well, who's going to be the coach, will help that process and that respect factor that I think that the team is going to need for Mr. Patrick Price, because Aches can lead the team. He really can. Like, Aches can actually lead this team. It's a matter of whether or not the young guns are willing to listen. And my issue comes from those minor disagreements that are going to form. They happen with every team. It was rumored Aches was supposed to be out of here, right? From the original roster. There was a lot of talk saying that, it's going to be Hook and Silly, maybe even just Hook by himself, or they're going to bring in a lot of, pieces around him. There was a lot of rumors going out there that Aches wasn't a part of that original group. So with that in mind, they may not respect his opinion as much, having a lot of that knowledge, right? Hook and Silly especially. Knowing that being the case, they might not respect Aches' opinion as much, because they say, you know what, this guy was almost out of here anyway. Why should we listen to this guy? Obviously, keeping in mind he is a two-time world champion. He does have a ton of regular championships himself, but why should I listen to him, right? That's the question that I feel like we could see from time to time. But getting back to another pickup that Envy managed to get, we have to speak on Decimate. This guy has looked incredible so far in Black Ops 4, and I mean, looking back at his stats so far in the year, in terms of Vegas, led his team in every KD-based game mode, had a 1.19 overall. When it came down to the PLQ, led his team in every KD-based game mode, except for Search and Destroy, 1.22 overall. On the year, he's averaging a 1.24 in Hardpoint, a 1.09 in Search and Destroy, a 1.29 in Control, a 1.26 in Respawns, and a 1.21 overall. Now, is he going to be putting up those same numbers with Hook by his side? Probably not, but he was playing with less talented players. That's the reason why that's going to be the case. But to know that slang ability is there is going to give Envy a lot of assurance. They're going to have a lot of peace of mind knowing that Decimate, if he needs to, can pretty much hard carry, because he's done it on prior lineups and has done it with different teammates when it came down to G2. And one last thing that I want to talk about with this Envy lineup that I am a big fan of, and I know that I've talked about it a little bit just a few minutes ago, is that this team already has chemistry, right? This team already possesses chemistry, and when it comes into roster changes, the number one thing that rosters deal with, especially as of this moment, is that they already start off in that honeymoon stage. They start off in a period where they're acting like they're really good friends, or they think that they're really good friends, and then the chemistry isn't there, and then things start to form, roles start to change up, arguments start to take place, and then players over time start to get the nod and start to get kicked out of the door. That's the reason why a lot of teams, in certain instances, see a lot of success if they start to stay together, or they make very minor changes, one player in, one player out type things. But one thing that's nice is that Decimate and f3ro, obviously coming to this team, are longtime friends. They've been playing Search and Destroy for years with each other. They've been prior teammates. They've also teamed for last year with Bevels, who happens to be the coach of this lineup. And if we think back to Champs last year, going alongside the chemistry topic, when Envy had their excellent top 6 placement, when there was a lot of question in terms of what they could do, of which that tournament run included a Game 5 loss to who? Evil Geniuses, who would later go on to win the entire tournament, and of which are also players that they're replacing and now playing alongside. And wait a second, who was on that Envy team and lost to Game 5 as well, not to just EG, but also to FaZe? It was Decimate, who also was playing alongside who? Because they've got chemistry. They played last year with each other for a short period of time and saw some good placements and were in the real, like, I guess you could say they were really in the trenches with each other for a long period of time. So you've got chemistry on this team, you've ensured slang, and you're aiming to grow further on the blueprint of which we know is this team. This team isn't trying to be a group of slayers and an IGL. This team isn't wanting to be, what this team really wants to be is a consistent unit that has the ability to outthink you in terms of vetoes and in terms of strategy. And I know I've harped on this many times, but my only concern with Envy as of this moment is, will the Young Guns try to plot up against the 2-time world champion and Aches, or can they all work together? Because in my eyes, this team needs a leader. This team needs a leader. They need Silly. They need Aches. We've seen many Slayer-based squads who are young try and work together in the past where they're all young and they just want to win and it doesn't work out. Teams need someone. They need a player. They need an IGL to hold them accountable. I hope this team doesn't fall victim to that. Like many other squads in the past, voting out their leader and losing momentum over time because of it. Breaking relationships because of it. And if they do that, I like Envy's chances. I really do. Toward the end of the year is where we'll start to see the strategies start to form and allow them to win games more often. And we haven't even scratched the surface yet in terms of what 5v5 can provide. So I think if Envy can work all those things out, rely on what has been their blueprint of their entire time of being together as a team, they could be in a really good spot.